speaker. Hmm. Hmm. Wait, I think that's working now. Let's try to go and practice a little bit of JavaScript again for today. Last time we worked on creating a very basic JavaScript script here inline using the onClick attribute. And we also learned about how to make some multi-line comments and single-line comments in JavaScript. And we did some exercises here that is related to our how we can try to add image, hide and show. We did some ways to change the background, change the text color, and I think this one is not working because the bulb image, let's see here. I think I actually created some directories here just to organize. So we'll need to move one directory up here for us to be able to get the image working. So we want to turn this off, turn this on, and we'll need to, I think we need to adjust some of our paths here. So we have relative and absolute paths, and in this case we are just saying that from the images folder, because we're inside of the intro.js folder, our file, we'll need to move one directory up for us to be able to access the images folder here. So if we go back to our browser, that should now be working. So we can change the text HTML content, we can change attributes, we can change styles, okay, and we can hide and show an image HTML elements using JavaScript. And now let's just try to go and work with, just open my Visual Studio Code here. Just want to work on variables. We do have what we call variables, or this is our like buckets of information, or let's say way for us to store information inside of our project. And let's see. How do we declare variables in JavaScript? So let's try to have some examples here. Variables. So we have some keywords that you might see in the web community. You'll find a number of ways on how to declare a variable. So we can use the var keyword, we can use the let keyword, and we can use the const keyword. Okay, so here let's just first declare a variable. Const player, assign the value of C here. So this is how we declare a variable. And we'll talk more about scoping, because there are some problems that you might encounter if we are working with the var keyword here. It will do certain things that sometimes will have certain level of ramifications. And that's why in relation to the term scope, we have some new keywords that we can try to utilize to solve what problems that we might encounter if we use the var keyword when we're declaring a variable. So once you hear me say declare a variable, that just means that we, let's say for example, have var x here. This is declaring a variable. And if var x is assigned the value of 1, this is us initializing a variable or assigning a value to a variable. Okay, so that means we're now, if we try to go and let's first put this here, scope, we are expecting some ramifications in relation to scope if we use the var keyword. We are expecting some ramifications or possible problems that we might encounter if we try to work with the var keyword. And that's why there are some other keywords that were introduced, and that will be let so to reduce the problems that we might encounter once we're using the var keyword in relation to the term scope. And we also have the const keyword here that will be telling the JavaScript compiler that in the future we don't want to really change this value. Let's say player life, for example, or let's say player. We don't want to change its value. We are not expecting that this is going to be changing a value. Okay, so that's just something to have in mind when you're working with declaring variables. So let's see. So there are actually 4 ways. So these are some of the ways of declaring variables. Okay, let me just, so we have the var keyword with the use of var, with the use of let, and with the use of const. And sometimes we can also use nothing. Let's see. That means, for example, we have y is assigned the value of 5. So you'll see we're not using any var, let, const keywords here, and we still have that y from this is considered to be as, so we have the let keyword, we have the const keyword, and we have undeclared variables. So just take note when we say ways of declaring variables, or once we talk about variables, these are us storing, we are storing data inside of a variable. But I think this is much better if we try to put that here. And initializing or assigning a value to a variable. We are storing data inside of a variable. I think we can try to call on this by, let's try to test out if we can try to call this on our console. Console.log, and let's have a, B, C. Let's have a console.log for Y also, just to test things out, right? You see, and let's have that X. Let's see if this will work on Node. We need to go to var. We are in cd varia 02. Sorry, we need to have 02. Let's go inside of that. That's where we would want to run variable declaration.js. What did we see is not defined. I think we should have this layer. Can we use a string here? Prod. Sometimes. Okay, so we have undefined, rod 5 and 1. Here we have an undefined because we did not initialize it with a value. We only declared it. And here the player, we assigned a value here. We can also change that to 1 if we wanted to. Or let's say life, for example. 50. Okay, and then we have here, what if we say C? Why is that? It's telling us it is not defined. I think that's because we're not specifying this character as a string. But if we turn that into a C, we get the C value to the player. And we can see that the Y, undeclared variable without using the keywords, we just use the variable itself. We can actually do that, no? We can try to store a value inside of it. And we can even combine. So here X, here we declare the variable, declaring a variable. We have declaring a variable, and that's why we are getting that value of 1. And again, just to prove that this, what is ever getting stored here is the value of 10. Okay, let's try to run this. You get to see that we have that 10 value. And we can also try to add some other things here. Let's see. Just want to where's that wrap option for word wrap? Let me just go to word wrap here just to make sure that we get to see everything right correctly. So let's say, so we'll talk about the data types of the values that we can store. We did mention that we can store data inside of a variable. So let's try to talk some of those data types as we move forward with some of the discussions that we'll be having here. And one of the things that will be quite unique when we're declaring variables using JavaScript is that here we don't have a data type that we assign to the variable that we declared. And only the values that we are storing inside of the variable has the data type. The variable itself is providing us the word undefined. It's just telling us that this is not a type of a data type. Okay. And if we try to use type of a, just to prove my point here, if we try to look at, it's saying undefined, right? It's highlighting undefined. And if we go here, type of player, we can see it's a string. That C character is a string. We give it and here we have we should be getting an integer here. So let's go. Type of Y and type of X, just to see. So we have string, number, and number. Let me just commit this. /m. Examples of declaring a variable, declaring, initializing, and checking data type of a variable. Let's push that to our repo. Usually you can open multiple terminals and you can actually rename this. I'm just going to say test environment, because that's where I'm going to be doing I'm going to run this. So let me just go back to that directory. Then here we can try to rename that to git and git commits. Okay, just so I can go back here if I wanted to. So while we're running some tests here, we can try to go back here now. So let's say I can use Control L key. Control K, is that Control L? Okay, sorry. Clear. So clear this environment first. So just take note, this type of allows us to test what type of data type we are able to display. Again, let's just try to node variables declaration. We're just testing and checking what type of data type that we are seeing here right now. So just take note, a data type is just some sort of data that we would want to store in a variable. Let's say if we want to go and perform some mathematical calculation or operation, and we want to use a number, for example, we have X and Y. We can try to var sum is assign the value of Y plus X, and we can try to console.log that here, and we can say sum. If I'm not making a mistake, this should run 15. We get the value of 15. Y plus 10 is equals to 15. We can also evaluate if something is true or false, or anything that we want. If, for example, we want to display something on the screen and we would want to have some sort of display on the output of our terminal or on the browser, that can also be done on the browser. Let's try to add here some examples for a Boolean. For example, let's have a Boolean example. So here's we can calculate operations. We can calculate using variables. Or we can perform mathematical operations using variables. We can check for yes or no, or true or false using variables. That's another thing that we can work with when we are working with variables. So let's go declare we have A, B, we have that C character. Let's have a letter D here. Let D is assigned the value of false. And let's try to console.log that down here. And D. But of course, we would want to type off this because this is a Boolean data type. So if we try to run this, so you'll see we're producing that type of D, which is a Boolean. So those are some things to take note of. When it comes to Boolean, we can set that to false or true. Usually Boolean data types are just providing us true or false value. Strings can be characters, single characters in the alphabet, or a single character, or we can actually say character here. That will still be, what did I do there? That will still be producing string up here for our cons player. So let's just double check my notes here. I'm actually working on a PHP exercises also. I want to practice teaching PHP, so perhaps I'll also work on some fundamentals for that. Now let's try to go back here. So far we have strings, we have Boolean data types, and we have integer data types. And take note, I'm using single quotes here, but you can also, let me just say player 1 here. Let's have a player 2. And what did I want to? We have const player 1, player 2. We can also use double quotes, and this will still be producing. That's why I'm getting some mental block here. We can use single quotes. We can also use double quotes. And that should still be producing a string. We have number. What did we do wrong here? I think that's because we did not update our console here. So usually the runtime environment from where you're working on will be providing you with some ways for you to figure things out. So we have string, again, type of A, undefined, type of B, type of B, still undefined. We have a string for the player 1, we have a string for the player 2, and take note, this is related to this one that uses a single quote, and this one uses double quotes to declare strings. To initialize or assign a string data type, just to be sure that we get to understand what's happening here. And if we try to I hope that this is clear, that if we did not assign a data type, we will get that undefined. So basically, we now have 4 data types. So if we try to note that, so far what we covered will be types of string, data type of string, number, undefined, or boolean first, that boolean, and undefined. So far those are what we're seeing here. If there's nothing declared or undeclared, we normally get an undefined, or we did not assign a value to it, we get an undefined. So this var keyword here, normally that's a keyword used in just some notes here. The var keyword is used for writing JS code since 1995 to 2015. So if you've been exploring learning programming during those times, you would commonly use the var keyword. And the let and const keywords were added to JavaScript in 2015, just to have that as a note. Some rules that we would want to take note of will be, perhaps we can put some information here just to add to our notes here. General rule, we want, number 1, of course, we want to always declare variables with const. This is like constant variables, right? Especially if we don't want, when we don't want to change the value inside of the variable. If we think we will need to change the value of a variable, we can use the let keyword. We'll talk more about these variables, especially when we're already working with with some projects, right? So if we, for example, have here some, let's have an example. Let's have some example. Let me just comment all of this out. I'm going to use the control key and the / key if you want a single line comment. Another way to do this is control K and C. You'll be able to comment out all of those in a single line comment, right? If we go now down here, let's have an example. But instead of doing this on the Visual Studio Code terminal here, let's try to write something inside of declaring var.html. Let's have an set to demonstrate here using another runtime environment, which is on the browser. JavaScript, right? And we'll have a total variable. So let's say we have here, let's have an h2. And let's open this up on our browser. Just open this up on my browser for our example here. Let's first try to commit this. Control C if you're encountering that. Let's again Control C. Clear. Git commit -m. Add declare var.html. Let's go back here and then let's go and let's close this for the meantime. I'm just going to go here and have a paragraph. Let's call this ID attribute here, or let's give it an ID reference of declare. Or let's just call this let's say we would want to declare the variable. So let's have a script tag here. And we want to have const p1 is 50, const p2 send of 10. And we then want the total to be p1 plus p2. Price 1, price 2. And let's have document that get element by ID, and let's target that declare here. And let's replace the inner HTML with some text that will say the total price is, let's have a space there. Not sure why that is not working. We word it up. Let's have a space plus the variable total. So we're referencing this total variable that we declared using and initialized using the let keyword. And we have some fixed prices here, which is 50 and 10. And now if we try to, we're using this paragraph element to reference the element in the document object model. So this is an object. If we go to our inspect element, you should be able to see in our console, if you try to type document, you can access a number of properties and methods. And in this case, we're accessing that get element by ID method, which is just another function. So we'll talk about function declarations and functions as we move forward. But just have this in mind. This is a function that we call a method because it's part of an object, and that method is a list of instructions that has already been created by other developers or the developer of the JavaScript language, and we're able to utilize that now by just invoking it and passing in some arguments inside of it. And we have our inner.html here, which is just accessing the element content inside of this paragraph element that we're referencing using the ID attribute declare. And we're passing in a string of text, and we're concatenating the value of total. So supposedly, if we try to refresh this, we get that total price is 60, sorry. 50 plus 10 is 60. So this just means that these are going to be constant values that will not be changed. And we can, of course, change the value of that total value P1 plus P2. And we can also use variables inside of expressions, like the one that we have here. Okay, so we have an expression. We'll talk about expressions as we move forward with our discussion related to some of the ways on how we can try to give instructions to the computer using JavaScript. And there are just some notes that we have to be aware of when we're working with some rules when it comes to declaring variables. So let's say just want to make sure that we get to note some the term. Let's go back here. We have what we call JavaScript identifiers. The term identifiers will just be pertaining to unique names or identifiers rules. So this will just be us adding unique names. So when we hear the term identifiers, these are just related to the term unique names. Okay. Let's see. variables, variable declaration. Let's just do some tests here. Just to demonstrate the word const here, for example. And we did see here some examples for concatenating. Just before we talk about identifier rules here, I just want to demonstrate here some reasons why we would want to use that const keyword. Let's say we have our player 1. And we never want to change the value of that. But instead of using this example, let's have a const e here. Let's give it a value of 8. So if we try to console.log this, let's try to clear this out. E. We should get that 8 value. But if we try to go and redeclare that value to 10, what will happen? We're getting an error, assignment to a constant variable, and it's giving us some signs here for debugging, saying that JS28 is assigned the value of 10. Is not going to be accepted because we're assigning a new value to that variable e that has that initialized value of 8 when we created and declared the variable. So we produce an error because we can never change the value of that const variable that we've already declared and assigned and initialized a value. So this will be... What happened there? I think this will run into an error. Okay. Let's try to do this now in, let's say, let's have 1. And let's have that console.log. F. Let's clear this out. So 8.1. F assign the value of 2. F assign the value of 3. Or let's first do that 2. 8 and 2. 3. We get 8 and 3. So you would see we're able to reassign the value 4. 8 and 4. So we get the 8, we get the 4. But again, if we try to do that here, we will run into an error. Okay, just have that in mind. fill this out. So we can run, or we can declare a variable, initialize it, and we can assign the value. We only needed to declare the variable once, then we can reassign the value to that variable as many times. So now, going back to our naming convention, if you're asking, will this also work if we have the var keyword, efg? Let's assign the value of 1. I forgot to console.log the variable g here. And will this still work? Same way, once we try to declare the variable. So you would see it's also working that way. Similar, we can reassign values also with the variable g. 3, and we can also say 3. And take note what's happening here. Why is that value being changed? Because it reads this in order. So first we declared, we initialized, then we reinitialized, then we reinitialize again, and then we reinitialize. So the last reassignment of the value number 4 is the one that's being displayed by the compiler, by the terminal, on the terminal, on the output. Again, let's try to call this as 5. And that's working. So for the naming conventions, some rules that we should be aware of will be of course, we need to make sure that all of the variables that we have here will be having unique names. And some things to take note of is that when we talk about identifiers are short names that can be X, B, or letters, or can be more descriptive like name, age, gender. Okay, so those can be identifiers. And some of this are not going to be totally enforced by the JS compiler, but there are certain best practices that has been discussed upon by the community of software developers that people agreed upon. Okay, so we have certain rules here. Let's say rule 1, we can use letters. We can use letters, digits, underscores, and dollar signs. For our identifiers. Okay. So meaning, if we try to test some things out here, so you would see we are using some letters here. Let me just go back on top of here, and I'll try to comment out some of our variables here so that we can try to reuse them. Just going to comment this out. Just going to comment this out, guys, so that We can try to reuse some of the okay, then let's go back down here now. Let's have a console.log a. So we can say that apple, assign the string apple, right? Will this work? Apple is not defined. I think that's because we did not call apple here. So we get that string apple. Will this still work if we have some underscore banana? Assign the string of banana fruit. I forget to sometimes this banana fruit. So that's still working with the underscore. We can also let $sign cherry fruit. Of course, that will not work because we're not console logging it, right? So we can just replace this with $sign cherry. And if we try to console.log this, we get that cherry fruit. So that means the rule 1 is working, right? Can we do let 1 1 cherry, send the value of cherry fruit 2. Is that going to digits? So combination of a number and a letter is not going to work for us. So see, we're running into an error here. Single digits can be acceptable, but if it's a number, so we'd see one cherry here is running into an error. I think it's telling us that unexpected token 1 cherry is assigned cherry fruit 2. But I think we can have this cherry 2 work for us. I think we need to also replace this, of course. Fruit 2. There is a fruit cherry, right? Just to make sure that I'm correctly. Cherry fruit. Yep, there is a cherry fruit. So now we can see that issue. So if we try to do let to cherry, assign the value of cherry fruit 2, we know that this will not work. Okay. Another rule that we would want to look into here will be what we just did here, right? I think it will be better. Oh, okay, we can just keep that there. Variable names must start with a letter. Okay, so that's what's currently happening here. Perhaps you can just say this is referring to that rule. Variable names must start with a letter. Variable names must start with a letter. Okay. And we cannot, of course, use any keywords. Let's say we have here let key assign the value of 1. Then you use let assign the value of 1. That's not, we cannot use any reserved keywords for declaring variables. Okay, that's the rule 3 here. Cannot use keywords. And of course, we have here another rule will be JS name variable names are case sensitive. Let's have an example of that. So if we go let person assign the value of rod, let person assign the value of seed, person, what are we going to get? Should get rod and seed. Those are two different variable declarations. So you'll see where this is different and this is different. So just have that in mind. Capitalization and case sensitive. These are case sensitive. So some good practices that you can try to take note of when working with variables will be, let's say code conventions. So we can have here some code conventions that we can take note of. Number 1, JS identifiers or variable names should be descriptive. And that means, let's try to avoid X or Y, B, A, which are not descriptive. So we would rather have, let's say, first number 7 or 70. Let last name Saint Lopez, right? Let's say let zip code signed 123. So these are descriptive names. Okay, these are descriptive names. We want to make sure that we use names that will be representing whatever we're going to be storing inside of that variable. And we can maximize the use of different casing. So we have what we call different casing styles. So we have what we call number 1, snake case, 2, snake cased. You might see some of this, camel cased, Pascal cased, and we also have what we call kebab cased. I think those are most of some of the different casing that you might see commonly. So different casing styles. We can say note here that we should be consistent with what naming style convention we would want to use. That's just something that when you're creating your variable declarations that you would want to use in your entire application, right? I think that's all for this session. I think I've mentioned some of the things here already. So different casing styles. So if you see that underscore, that's a snake case. Camel case is just the first letter is small and then the second letter is going to be capitalized. Usually Pascal case will be, usually this is used for classes when you're working with classes. Kebab case is usually seen in most URLs when you're setting up some URLs. And even with CSS properties, right? So I think that's it for the meantime. I just wanted to have a quick review of the ways on how we can declare variables. So thank you everyone, and let me just commit this so that we'll have some git add all git commit -m add code conventions naming and best practices notes git push. I think we weren't able to use this anymore. That's it.